Sometimes the most powerful battles are not fought on the battlefield, but in the heart of a father when he must leave his children behind, not knowing if he'll ever see them again. It was the winter of 1944, the world torn apart by the Second World War. In a small house in Kentucky, the fire crackled softly, giving warmth against the biting cold. Inside, a family gathered around the table. John Miller, a father of 3, and his children. Thomas, just 10 years old, Emily, 7, and the youngest, David, barely 4. John wore his Army uniform, freshly pressed, but his boots were already worn from training. His wife, Mary, moved quietly in the kitchen, though her hands trembled as she placed a pot of stew on the table. She tried to act strong, but everyone knew the truth. John would be leaving in the morning. The children sensed it, though only Thomas understood the weight of it fully. He looked at his father and asked softly, "Daddy, why do you have to go?" John reached across the table, his large hand covering his son's small one. His voice was gentle, yet steady. "Because, son, sometimes a man has to do something not for himself, but for others. There are people who need us, and if I don't go, someone else's father might not come home." Mary bit her lip, turning her face away, her eyes filling with tears. That night, after the children had eaten, John gathered them close in the small living room. The oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the wall. He sat them down, one on each knee and one tucked beside him. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the storm of a man preparing for battle. "Thomas, Emily, David, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if I'll come back the same man I am tonight, but I need you to remember something." The children listened, their wide eyes fixed on him. To be brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, one he carried even during training. Inside, he had written messages for them, words he wanted them to have if he never returned. For Thomas he wrote, "Be strong for your mother. You are the eldest, and one day you will grow into a fine man. Protect your sister and brother the way I protect you." For Emily, never lose your kindness. The world can be dark, but your laughter and your smile can light it up again. Hold on to that. For little David, who barely understood, he wrote, "I love you, son, and even if I am not here to see you grow, know that I am always proud of you." He folded the notebook back and held them close. "Promise me," he whispered, "that no matter what happens, you'll look after each other. That's the greatest gift you can give me." The next morning, John kissed Mary one last time on the porch, holding her hand longer than he should have. He bent down, kissed each child on the forehead, and whispered, "I'll see you again, I promise." But as he walked away, his shoulders heavy with the weight of war, Mary saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. He wasn't certain of that promise. Days later, John was far from Kentucky, standing in the frozen forests of Belgium. It was December, the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. Snow fell heavily, muffling the sound of gunfire, but the air was filled with fear and the smell of gunpowder. As shells exploded around him, John reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the small notebook, the one with the words, "For his children." He pressed it close to his chest, whispering, "Hold on to me, kids. I'm still with you." He fought bravely, leading his men, protecting them as best as he could. Every time he closed his eyes for a second, he saw his children's faces, the wide eyes of Thomas, the innocent smile of Emily, the tiny hands of David clutching his finger. That memory was his shield against despair. One night, after a long and brutal day, John sat in a foxhole. Snow melted on his helmet, soaking his hair, but he didn't notice. He pulled out a scrap of paper and wrote by candlelight. "My dear Mary, if this letter reaches you, it may mean I couldn't keep my promise. Tell the children that I loved them more than words can ever say. Tell them that their father fought not for glory, not for medals, but so they could live in a world free from this madness. And Mary, don't let the children grow up in sorrow. Tell them to laugh, to dream, to live fully. That is how I want them to remember me." As he finished writing, gunfire erupted nearby. John folded the letter and tucked it safely inside his jacket, next to his heart. Moments later, the battle raged once again. John rose to protect his men, but a sudden explosion tore through the ground beside him. He was thrown into the snow, his body trembling, his vision fading. His last thought was not of war, but of his children running into his arms, calling, "Dad is home!" And then, silence. Weeks later in Kentucky, Mary received the dreaded knock on the door. A solemn officer stood with a folded flag in one hand and a small envelope in the other. Her hand shook as she took the letter. She sat by the fire. The children gathered close and read aloud the words John had written. Thomas tried to be strong, but his tears fell silently. Emily clung to her mother's arm, her sobs breaking the quiet. Little David didn't fully understand, but he cried because everyone else did. Mary's voice cracked as she whispered the last line. "That is how I want them to remember me." The room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the children's soft weeping and the crackle of the fire. Years passed. Thomas grew into the strong man his father had asked him to be. Emily carried her kindness into adulthood, becoming a teacher, touching countless lives with her smile. And David, though he barely remembered his father's voice, carried his words in his heart. The notebook John left behind remained in the family. Passed down through generations, it became a symbol, not of war, but of love, sacrifice, and the words of a father who wanted nothing more than for his children to live in peace. Even decades later, when John's grandchildren read the notebook, Mary would say softly, "Your grandfather's greatest battle was not out there in the snow. It was here, in his heart, when he chose to leave us with love instead of fear." A soldier's legacy is not just in the battles he fought, but in the words he left behind for the ones he loved most. Sometimes those words carry more power than any weapon. They live on, long after the battle is over. Did this story touch your heart too? Share your thoughts in the comments